Welcome to the Life After Sugar podcast, the podcast that's not just about sugar, but about your relationship with it and also with food and especially with yourself. So if you want to discover your life after sugar and hear inspiring stories from all kinds of people who also cut out sugar in their way, at their pace, for their own reasons, this is the podcast for you. Because when you take away the sugar, you can finally discover the real sweetness in your life. I'm your host, Netta Gorman, and this week I'm talking to Jan Steele, aka La Goose, because she's based in the beautiful Cevennes Mountains near Montpellier in France. She's actually a nutritional therapy consultant, a cooking instructor, and an allergen-friendly vacation host because she herself has celiac disease. And actually, what we talk about is how her intolerance to gluten has helped her to learn to harness the power of real food in order to feel better. And now she has a wonderful gluten-free bed and breakfast in the south of France. We'll get to our chat in just a minute. And this week's episode is brought to you by the After Sugar Club, which is where you'll get the step-by-step guidance you need from me to help you let go of sugar and the emotional hold it has on you so that you can get to a place of freedom where you don't even need, want, or miss it anymore. So that you can break free from sugar for good and make your intermittent fasting lifestyle easy and natural. That's aftersugarclub.com and click on the green button, join the club. And if you're an intermittent faster, then I have 5 tips for you to help you get rid of cravings that may be getting in the way of you living your easy and natural intermittent fasting lifestyle. Go to aftersugarclub.com and download my 5 tips there. And if this is your first time here, welcome! Don't forget to subscribe to this podcast so that it appears magically in your podcast player every Sunday. And if you've listened to several episodes before and you haven't yet left a review, could I ask you to scroll down, please, and rate the podcast and leave a lovely review to tell me how this podcast is helping you in your life after sugar. Has it inspired you to reduce sugar? Has it made you think about sugar a little bit differently? Let me know. I love reading your reviews. Thank you. All right, so here's my chat with Jan. So I'm talking today with Jan Steele, also known as La Goose, because you live in the south of France now, right?
I do, yes, but I'm Canadian.
But you're Canadian as well, fellow Canadian on the other side of Canada from me.
That's right.
You're from Vancouver?
Yes, I am. I grew up in Vancouver, yeah.
Okay, so tell me a little bit about what your life was like when you were still eating sugar and all the things, and then what happened to sort of change all that?
Well, honestly, so my story is somewhat unique in that there was, a couple of things. So I'm a celiac, so I have celiac disease, but I was diagnosed when I was a very small child. So in fact, the transition to a gluten-free diet was not done by me. It was done by my mother, my parents, and largely my mother. And so I grew up not having ever understood why people struggle with these things because it was just my norm and it was my way of living. And I honestly didn't know what all the fuss was about. And so I think that speaks to the power of habit and culture. And if it's something that you take for granted, you just don't question it. And it's only when there is a choice that all of a sudden you have to start thinking and thinking too hard probably, and then wondering whether this or that is good for you or not. And the great aspect or the very immediate illness that follows ingesting gluten for a celiac is very, very persuasive. So it's a great deterrent to help us comply, I think. And so there was just no motivation to cheat on the gluten-free diet because you felt awful right pretty immediately.
Yes, yeah, that is a great motivation, because I've had some people tell me, look, if sugar, or in your case, gluten, but for them, if sugar made me feel so awful, I would stop it straight away. But for a lot of people, it's, for sugar at least, it's not as immediate as for gluten. For you, it takes years and years, which is why most of us sort of wake up in our 40s and 50s about sugar.
Yeah, and sugar I think is really quite nefarious and sort of insidious because it is everywhere now. Um, and and like you said, industry has done such a good job of making it ubiquitous that we don't even question it anymore. And it's in things that it has no business being in. It's sometimes in there as a preservative, even not even so much as a flavor component. So anyway, so I grew up gluten-free, and then it was only much later when I had my children that pregnancy then kind of activated my autoimmune issues. And so that's when and then, previous several years of small children who don't sleep and who require an incredible amount of energy. And
Yep.
my husband worked really long hours, so I was essentially single momming it. And just all of that, the stress of all of that, plus multiple international moves and all the rest of it, made for a really quite a difficult period of time for me there. And that's when I started really questioning what was going on, feeling like I was going to not survive for much longer, and feeling like that was not possible because my children were far too young to be living without a mother.
Yeah.
That I was just sort of what finally motivated me to act on these horrible feelings was that I was looking at my small children and thinking, they need me, they're going to need me. They in fact already need me more than I can show up for them. And so something has to change, something has to give. And so I really started digging into the nutritional therapy concept, which was not a foreign concept for me because I already understood. I mean, having lived gluten-free, it was very obvious to me that there would be certain people for whom eating this or that would be more beneficial.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I went to first the GAPS diet, which I felt was really interesting. And that, so it deals with sugar, but it's not only that. It's all of these sort of approaches are mostly aiming for similar goals in aiming for restoring the intestinal tract, restoring the microbiome. Yes, eliminating sugar so that if we have issues with candida, we can deal with those. I mean, there's so many different aspects to health. But when you finally sort of engage with something and then the fog starts lifting, it's just such a revelation, I think, when like I was to the point where I'd read enough about it that I thought, oh, I'm so excited, I'm getting a migraine, it must be working, like I was just really excited.
Yeah.
And it was just even more motivating that it was, because some of the bacteria are going to emit toxins as they die off. And so you feel first worse before you feel better. And for me, that was proof that it was working. It wasn't a deterrent to continuing. It was like, oh, I'm finally getting somewhere with this.
Yes, and I guess it was the fact that you educated yourself on these things that made you say, oh, this is a good thing. Like the die-off, which I also had when I started looking after my gut health, but with different symptoms. I mean, you have to know what it is, otherwise it's pretty freaky and scary.
Yeah, well, and I think, we're also, kind of fickle beings. And, when we want to adopt change, I think in the back of our head, we're also a little bit reluctant to do it no matter what the change is. And so there's something in our subconscious that's constantly looking for an out. I don't know. In my instance, I was really, really determined, and I felt so bad that I just felt like I couldn't get any worse. So I might as well engage with this. And we were talking about a period of 2 weeks where I was going to just go on nothing but bouillon for 2 weeks. And I thought I'm going to do at least that. And I'm convinced enough that that's not dangerous that I'm going to do that. And so de facto, I eliminated sugar cold turkey because there is no sugar in bouillon, homemade broth, homemade chicken broth. And it did. It just, within 11 days, I could just feel everything subside, all the inflammation, all the swollenness, and all of the discomfort, and all of the brain fog, and just everything. And yes, for the first couple days, it was tricky because, of course, everything is saying to you, go and have something else to eat, go, and you just can't get your head off of it.
Right.
We're such slaves to our intestinal tract and whatever's living in there.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's like the body doesn't recognize, when we've been eating a certain way for years and years, the body doesn't recognize what real food is or what feeling good is.
Well, and I think we all get to the point where we're not eating because we're hungry, especially in the West. We eat because it's noon and you're supposed to eat at noon, you know? But I think we should begin to question that as well. I think we should try to re-engage with our bodies. I mean, too frequently we are taught to ignore what's going on inside our bodies because, you know, we're following a school schedule, or we're following a work schedule, or we're following a daytime schedule, and there's certain things that happen at certain times. And while I understand the efficiency model, I'm not sure that it's perhaps, you know, the one most based in health.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you from personal experience. And plus, I feel, but you've got, you know, training as a nutritional therapy, and I had consulted a nutritional therapist whose advice changed my life for the better. So, you know, I really respect what that approach is, which happens to be pretty much the opposite of any approach to do with nutritional health that I'd ever come across.
Yeah. Well, and it's really frustrating because those of us who have studied with the Nutritional Therapy Association, and particularly in the States, you're right. The concepts that we discuss are very little discussed in the realm of nutrition education. So then we're stuck, like even now, my daughter's now in grade 4, so she's learning about nutrition. And so she comes home with these worksheets that just have no bearing in reality as far as I'm concerned. And I'm left to think, okay, what's the approach here? You know, do we just do the worksheet and send it in, or should we be pushing back on this and questioning with the teacher? But the teacher didn't study nutrition. The teacher's just taking it out of the science textbook, you know. But that's where we're at. And then so that anyone who did a degree, who did 4 years worth of nutrition studies and became a dietitian or became a nutritionist, has a very different take on it. And it's a much more conventional medical model. It's still got a lot to do with counting of calories, with weight loss, with whereas my training was, who cares about calories? Calories don't measure anything because, and the problem with counting calories is that it pre-assumes that they're all equal.
Right.
Obviously, the calories that are provided by a chocolate bar could not be deemed to be equivalent to the calories, even if it's the same 100, that the calories that are provided by a carrot. So maybe they both have 100 calories, but there's no doubt in my mind that the carrot's going to be more valuable than the chocolate bar. And if you're only measuring calories, how would you ever determine that?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And I had Michelle Hearn, who quit being a dietitian because she was saying, well, you know, I was giving advice that was actually harming people and kind of being obliged to give it. Although I've seen nutritionists and dietitians will make that distinction between, let's say, the 100 calories in chocolate and 100 calories in, I think they usually say broccoli, but carrots are good enough. But they don't actually, I never found that they explained why. What is it about? I mean, they go on about empty calories, but someone like me with no background in the sciences and stuff, I didn't understand what empty calories meant. I didn't know what effect it had on insulin. I didn't know. I thought insulin was only for diabetics and nobody else had to think about it. And I didn't even know what it was. I didn't even know it was made by the pancreas, you know. I knew nothing about how insulin can lead to weight gain. It was all about calories.
Yeah.
As you say.
And I mean, there's a fascinating debate that exists within the realm of diabetes because there's a huge debate around diabetes treatment and whether or not we should be promoting the treatment of diabetes via insulin shots. Because in fact, what is inflammatory is insulin. And so, yes, we can now lower the blood sugar by applying an injection of insulin, but insulin is what is inflammatory in the bodily process. So with no discussion of diet, the disease, the diabetes, is as an autoimmune disease in the case of type 2 diabetes, which is becoming more and more prevalent. The autoimmune process and the diabetes itself, it's going to continue to progress within the bodily systems if we're doing nothing more than managing the blood sugar levels. But we're still, in fact, eating too much sugar, but then managing it with insulin.
Makes no sense.
So is that the way that we should be treating diabetes? Or should we be addressing it largely via dietary change first, and then as an emergency measure, bringing in far smaller doses of insulin in the form of injection?
Yeah.
But without that dietary component, which is, I think, the large majority of how diabetes is treated these days, yeah, I mean, it would be tantamount to, and there are people and there are trials in progress right now in terms of the gluten-free issue. There are many companies that are trying to develop a sort of a lactate for gluten, where you could be celiac and just eat this pill before you have your gluten-containing meal, and now you'll be fine. And I'm saying, except that no, I won't, because it's going to still trigger the inflammatory process and re-trigger the autoimmune process. And unless that's under control, I'm going to develop a second and then a third and then a fourth autoimmune disease, because we know that that's how that happens. And so I have celiac disease, and then you get Hashimoto's, and then, so, I think we do need to look farther than just the immediate, okay, what's the immediate impact of having this piece of candy or having this milkshake or having this extra slice of whatever. Yeah. Or having these, carrots, or having this cup of juice with my breakfast instead of an actual orange,
Yeah, absolutely. And also to sort of reevaluate what normal diet is, what normal is, because of this such a strong message of everything in moderation, don't cut anything out, that's disordered eating. And I'm thinking all that processed stuff, I can't even call it food, that I used to be eating, in the way that I was eating it, which is really craving it, that's disordered.
Well, and I certainly think in the modern era, so I went to cooking school after all of, so my focus was always to be the person that could help someone learn to cook differently. Because they, I don't want to convince someone that they need to eat gluten-free, but if somebody wants, is convinced that that's what they want or need to do, I'm happy to now show them how to do it, because I think in the kitchen there is a lot of sort of technical skills that can be useful, and it's a bit of a learning curve. And once you've got these little skills under your belt, then I think you're good, and you can live quite easily. But so in cooking school, I found it to be really strange also that there was never any discussion of nutrition, when in fact we're cooking with food. We're talking about food,
Absolutely.
So the whole food culture, whether it be in terms of like choosing your diet, or also the whole aesthetic and taste and texture and all of that. We talked about the whole aesthetic realm of cooking, the gastronomic type discussion. But I think it has sort of fallen by the wayside that we in fact eat to feed our bodies, and not just our tongue. And I think that in the rush of modern life also, we forget that. We too often are just go, 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 go. And lunch is like a 20-minute period in between classes, or in between, I don't know, extracurricular activities at school, or I have to run, and then I'm going to throw it, and then I'm going to scarf down a sandwich in front of my computer. I think, again, we're underestimating the value that food, or the role that food is supposed to play in our lives. and we're not giving it the time and consideration that it really does deserve, so that we can be healthy. So I think there's a number of problems. I think the industrial model, but that just feeds into that, because convenience food, we grab it because we're in a rush, but maybe even if you're eating an immaculate diet, if you're working 80 hours a week, maybe the immaculate diet is probably not going to save you anyway, and you're probably going to be more stressed than you needed to be anyway, and you may be having some hypertension issues. It's like you can't sort of dig your way out of a really bad lifestyle, and you can't eat your way out of a lack of sleep, and you can, like everything has to kind of be in balance, and food is just one aspect of that. But I think if we do take the time to slow down, if we do take the time and energy to go back to thinking about, is it a horrible thing to spend an afternoon making a cake and then enjoying it with your family on a special occasion? I honestly, I don't think so. But I think that the value in terms of that cake goes way beyond the cake itself. I think the value is in spending the time with your daughter or your son or your husband or whomever to make the cake. First, we go and we get the ingredients, and then we take the time and we make it, and then we ice it, and it's all of that. And then, yes, we're going to ingest it, but the give and take of having spent and invested in that, and the cultural value and is so much more than just going to a bakery, getting a beautiful cake, showing up at a place, scarfing down 2 or 3 pieces and then walking away. It's just a different engagement, I think.
Yeah, it's the engagement and that quality time together that's what counts. And yes, for me, it's like because I felt so much better without the cake, without the sugar and everything else. It just forced me to keep that aspect of it, the time together and that slowing down, and just translate it into another type of activity or another type of food.
Absolutely. And that, you're right. I mean, there are too many instances where activities revolve around food when they have no business really doing that. And we've turned every single activity, it seems, good or bad, positive or grief or anything, we've turned it all into a little bit of an orgy of sugar. And you go to the movie and you're supposed to have this bucket full of pop, or I don't know what, like I just can't even think,
you can't sort of do anything without eating, and there's snacking at night when you're watching a movie and all that stuff, even at home.
Coffee's just gone so far beyond what coffee, I remember dealing with a woman in Lebanon who was really having a hard time adopting a specific protocol. And one of the things was that she was needing to, or questioning whether she should have coffee. And I said, well, at the end of the day, maybe a coffee is not going to be all that horrible for your body. But let's first agree on, what are we talking about when we say what is coffee? Because she was taking those little packages, the little 3-in-1 packages, and ripping it open and dipping it into hot water. And I don't know what kind of chemicals are in that, but if you look at the ingredients, I don't even think there's any coffee in that. I was just like, can we at least agree that this is not coffee, right?
Right.
So at the end of the day, if your only improvement is that you've gotten away from that and gotten rid of anything that comes in a package and gone back to actual recognizable food that came out of the earth somehow, somewhere, E482 is not growing in my garden. So we have to not be eating that,
Yeah, totally. Yes. And it doesn't have to be all or nothing, which is so intimidating and a great way to sabotage oneself by saying, oh, well, if I can't eat 100% so-called clean, which I just call food, then it's not worth doing, blah, blah. We do tend to sort of make excuses.
Of course.
I just want to take a quick break to introduce you to my partner for this podcast, Medicine with Heart, which is an international functional medicine clinic specializing in difficult chronic cases of hormone imbalance, Lyme disease, mold illness, and digestive dysfunction. You can sign up for a consultation with their team to see if they can help reverse your disease. Find out more about them at medicinewithheart.com.
Of course, but so I would encourage everyone to try to become, a bit of a food snob, and so but define food properly. Like, food is not, because I had lots of, fellow chefs for whom it was gorgeous what they were making, like they were messing with the chocolate and the pastries and whatever. And I'm like, it's gorgeous what you've done, but please don't put that in your mouth, because we need to recognize that that's no longer food. Like, molecular gastronomy is sculpture and it's beautiful, but it's not food anymore. Can we please,
Yes, we do need a proper or a new definition of what food is, which is really
and the one that the one that informs me mostly is to go back to the ancestral model, to sort of go back to thinking about how early man survived on the planet for centuries. And because when we look at the condition of their bodies now, when, granted, you had to survive through childhood, so early childhood, fine, but, they lived to have quality of life for, in many cases, far longer than we are now today. And with all of our luxuries of the modern world, we've got some really, really, really bad civilization diseases that are that we're coping with, and that we're in fact choosing to cope with.
Yes, that we're sort of creating and then having to cope with. But I mean, I don't think we even have to go back that far in history. I just think of my grandparents that lived during the Second World War in London, and they ate what I call real food.
Yeah, no, I mean, there are some fascinating books out there that talk about the advent of sugar and the arrival on the scene of sugar. And even when you go back even further than, like you said, your grandparents, if you go back further into the Renaissance and the kings and the queens, and there were times where, similar to, how like the paleness of your skin was meant to be like determinant of your class within society. Well, your accent, the quality of your teeth was meant to do that, because if you had access to sugar, it meant that necessarily you were wealthy. And so if you had really crappy teeth,
really?
It was like a sign of noblesse, that you have these rotting teeth as a child. And isn't that wonderful how? And I'm like, yeah, okay, so maybe
Crazy, isn't it? Yes, crazy. And that much more crazy that, you were like forced to be more aware of the quality of what you eat, because because early on in your life, gluten made you feel so awful. And when you cut out gluten, I would imagine you also cut out a whole load of other processed foods, because that's mainly where gluten is found, right?
Well, and so I had the benefit of being diagnosed in the 70s, like I'm old. So I was being diagnosed at a time when it wasn't happening all that frequently, certainly not for children. So I was very fortunate. The other people that I met who were celiac of my age were more regularly, had lived ill for upwards of 10 years, had been misdiagnosed time and again, and then were finally diagnosed with one and often two autoimmune diseases when they finally did put their finger on it. And it was a time when processed foods were just starting to come into their own. So we had the breakfast cereals and those kinds of things, but we didn't really have the whole plethora of gluten-free industrial foods that are available today. I think that's a real pitfall that newly diagnosed people today fall into, because you can have again, like if you're not going back to truly define what are the foods that you're going to eat, I think no matter what the guidelines that you set out for yourself are, you can still be eating really badly. So you can still eat a really horribly poor gluten-free diet.
Yeah.
If you do nothing but replace your gluten-containing foods with now industrial gluten-free foods, you will have changed nothing. And I I dare to guess that probably you will not feel all that much better.
Yes, they've done a great job marketing that gluten-free label on.
Again, it's the convenience. And there are times, don't get me wrong, there are times where it's valuable because you need to just sort of grab something and go. And so it's wonderful. I mean, it's a little bit wonderful if you do it wisely. But if you rely on those products too much, and I think most people do because they can, when I grew up, we couldn't. There wasn't any. There was rice cakes and they were awful.
Yeah.
When I was, 14 years old, I absolutely didn't want to eat a rice cake. It's like puffed cardboard. So necessarily breakfast for me was, vegetables or an omelet but so I didn't ever come to have as my comfort foods these products that are highly industrial that can sit on a shelf for 6 months at a time, if not more, and never move. I mean, again, that's my definition of it's not food then. If it
Yes.
comes in a package and has a date on it that's further than,
next week
season,
yeah.
it's questioning, you need to question, is this food? So my comfort food, and don't get me wrong, I mean, I ate gummy bears like the next person when I was a child, but the dessert tray would go by and I just didn't even question whether I could even bother looking because I just figured it was all contaminated anyways and I didn't want to get sick. And so there was that as the benefit. Today I run a gluten-free bed and breakfast in the south of France here. And what I really love is seeing people come and seeing them happily surprised at the food that we're able to provide them, that they felt like they had, because we're in France too, where bread is, it's a religion here. So, the baguette.
Yes, love that stuff.
So there's something to that as well. And I think that, on the one hand, you do want to be able to make peace with your diagnosis and not feel like you can't ever eat the foods that you loved and that you've created these relationships with as your comfort foods. But I also, want people to, if you're going to eat gluten-free, out of necessity, out of, a health prerogative, then be smart about it. Don't just replace whatever was gluten containing, like when I see on Facebook these debates as to whether or not we should start a petition so the McDonald's offers gluten-free fries, and I'm just like, oh, what a waste of time. I can't engage with that. I don't care about that. I don't care if McDonald's would have gluten-free French fries and I still wouldn't eat them. So I think I want to work with people for whom health is at the core. And if the gluten-free thing is of interest or of necessity, then let's talk about it. And I'm absolutely not judging people who eat gluten. I think that that's silly. I'm also not praising people for eating gluten-free because I think that's silly too. I think everybody has to make their choices and live with them. I personally don't have the option, so fine. And so I've come to eat this way with absolutely no complex about it. And within the restaurant setting, I don't engage also with the debate that is, are you a problem client because you're requiring a gluten-free? This is how I have to eat and I'm coming to give you my money. And if you're going to make me sick, I'm going to be irritated. So, I'm going to give you every opportunity to comply with my dietary needs, whether or not you agree with them. I'm not here to ask you whether you agree with how I should eat. Thank you for your interest, but maybe I'll make my choices.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And it does feel a bit like if you are anywhere outside the so-called norm of what, I don't know who decided what the norm is, but it certainly wasn't us, in a restaurant or in a sort of social situation, a gathering, whatever, then yeah, there is a certain feeling that you're difficult or some sort of party pooper or making other people feel bad. Whereas, you're just, people wouldn't say that if you had broken your arm or whatever, but they pass judgment, or you feel like they do sometimes because of what
I don't know. There's a weird twist to the service industry in that respect. But having now, been on either side of the kitchen, yeah, I'm a more problematic client today than I ever was prior to going to cooking school, because I've seen how much and how little rigor there can be for individual workers in a kitchen, and the potential is quite high for there to be problems. And so like I said, I want to give the kitchen staff every opportunity to give me the plate that they want to give me. As a worker in a kitchen myself, I want to give the client a really high quality experience, and I certainly don't want to make them sick. And so the conversation becomes really important. So rather than not wanting to take the time, I go the other way. I want to go out in my whites as the chef to say, hello, I'm hearing that you have some sensitivities. Let's talk about it, because I want to, make sure that I have a handle on them if I'm going to serve you a really good meal, And I think it gets twisted and contorted in terms of, the litigious nature of society sometimes, and that's for good, for better and for worse. And I think, fads, and I think there does have to be a little bit of coherence. I mean, I myself have had clients who say that they're going to eat gluten-free, and then they order a beer with their meal, and you're like, well, okay, but beer is not gluten. So, yeah. I get it. There are degrees of, but that's always going to be the case. And at the same time, it is a service industry. So if somebody wants a gluten-free dish, I think it's our job to provide a gluten-free dish, and whether or not they have a beer with it is absolutely none of my business.
Yeah, that's great that you're so sensitive to people's sensitivities, as it were, and that that you have taken your situation with celiac disease and applied it to a positive offering, which is your bed and breakfast.
Well, I think in France there's a real delay in terms of being able to accommodate difference generally. Yeah. So, and especially maybe in the cuisine, cuisine is kind of a rigid thing, and France is a bit of an icon for cuisine, and there's the whole bread culture. And so all of these things tend to work against any kind of gluten-free culture making its way into mainstream society. So, I mean, and like I said, I'm from Vancouver, where I was 12 and there were gluten-free cafes popping up. It's just part of the backdrop in Vancouver and on the West Coast. And so to be now 40 years later in a place where you can still count on the palm of your hand the number of places that I could potentially go and eat and be guaranteed that the kitchen was 100%, gluten-free, is in a country that's, 4 times the population. It's just baffling to me that could be the case, but great. That means that I have a niche, and it means that people do find me, and they're more than happy to come back. And, I feel like I'm building a super loyal clientele, and it's lovely. It's truly lovely to have. And I love being able to provide that complex free model also, because I think the people here that are newly diagnosed are still really grappling with, is it okay that I'm different like this? It's not a choice.
It's not a choice. And even if it were, so be it.
Right, but it's not. And people that want to choose to eat gluten-free should have that opportunity as well. But for many people, it's not a choice. And because it's not a choice, then it just seems, in my mind, to follow that these options should be available more readily. And, school cafeterias have to be more accommodating, and they're not. And so, it's a real struggle still, far more than it should be in this context. And so it's lovely to have a family come for 10 days in the summer and have everybody collectively exhale over the course of 10 days, and the mom can just they can eat here and it's okay, nobody's going to get sick, and even I can have a holiday then, because otherwise they do an Airbnb and she's having to figure out how does the new grocery store work, and what are the pots and pans, and it's not a holiday for her. But here she can come and she can just be along the side of the pool, and I'll cook for them.
Fantastic.
And all of us are going to eat together. It's a very normalizing experience too, because my children eat gluten-free and I eat gluten-free, and so everybody's around the table, and it's not okay, here, this is your portion and everybody else eats something else. It's we're all going to eat like this.
Yes, it is normalizing. It's fantastic, that because we often feel on the sidelines of society if we veer from anything that's considered normal. And I've had that myself with this, and I by default eat gluten-free now because I don't eat any or very few processed products. But luckily for me, if I do happen to eat gluten, it's not going to harm me. It'll give me stomach cramps for sure,
Yeah.
because I've become that much more sensitive to it. But that's not quite the same as being celiac, But
Sure.
but I mean, when you veer from what other people consider is normal, then it's tough. It's really tough. And then, you
Well,
feel sad.
I think too often people take our own approach as somehow a criticism of how they do it, and so
Yes.
there's a negative reaction there. And that's absolutely not the intention. I mean, I'm not eating gluten-free to make you feel bad. I'm eating gluten-free because I will get sick if I eat this.
Yeah.
But so I hear in other people's reaction that they feel like it has something to do with them, and it absolutely does not. And so I think it takes a certain emotional intelligence to get to the point where you can accept difference without feeling judgment.
Yeah, that's lovely. Yes, totally. So do you have clients who are just French from France, or are they from all over the world at your bed and breakfast?
Well, we've been here for a good year, but it's crazy times.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
With COVID and all the rest of it and all the lockdowns and all. So I've had numerous people from numerous places, but they have all been people who live either in France or in Europe for the moment. But so I've had Australians and I've had Canadians and Belgians, but they're all people that were living here because they were stuck here during the COVID era.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm interested to see, starting this summer, how things are going to evolve. So yeah, we're hopeful that there will be more and more, opening of societies around the world. And so I think we are hopeful that we are acquiring the herd immunity that was, the ultimate goal for us all. But we'll have to see. I do have one project that is an AIP retreat. The AIP is the autoimmune protocol, and so I'm offering an AIP retreat. So it's a full 7-day program in July for anybody that wants help adopting the AIP. The AIP is a bit of a protocol that's kind of elaborate. It's a variant on the paleo diet. And I'm an AIP coach and my colleague is an AIP coach. And so it's one of the few opportunities that people have to have us put you on the diet initially and also coach you through how you can then learn how to cook this way and how to adopt. And we're going to talk about all the different lifestyle issues. And so yeah, that's going to be a really exciting offering. And then beyond that, I do lots of yoga retreats. People are welcome to get in touch if they're interested in collaborating to put a retreat together. I mean, I'm always up for that kind of collaboration. I think that's amazing. I'm in a beautiful, beautiful region. We're in the Cévennes National Park, so we're just about an hour north of Montpellier. And it's just a country village where we have 2 donkeys and the neighbor's rooster are the only sounds that you will likely hear while you're here.
Fantastic. Wonderful.
The babbling brook that goes through the yard. And the purpose is to be right back outside and as much in the greenery of the surrounding as you can be. And you lay in the hammock and I will cook for you and you can just
yeah, wonderful.
Nature and yourself and yeah. And I mean, and anybody that's wanting to talk about health and diet, and I'm happy to tell them what my position is, but I think at the end of the day, everybody has to come up with their own definition of what it is that they want their diet to be and why, and what foods make them feel good and which ones don't. And it is very individual, and that's okay.
Yeah. And that I think gives us back our personal power to decide what's good for us and what's not so good. Mm-hmm. Instead of being told by, and I respect, the dietitians and the nutritionists. It's just that it's not a one size fits all. For me, what makes me feel good is kind of like the opposite of what they say should make me feel good.
Well, again, I think we're not always starting with health. and resiliency and a robust health as our goal. I think often people are going to those people because they want to lose weight, but losing weight is not always going to be a pursuit that is, in pursuit of health. You can lose weight. Like thin isn't healthy necessarily. There are lots of people who are thin and incredibly unhealthy.
Yeah.
And there are lots of people that are heavier that have wonderfully solid and robust health. So I think we have to stop conflating those two issues also. But yeah, I mean, I think if we all kept health, true definitions of health as what our end goal was, the world would be a very different place, I think.
I totally agree. Thank you so much for talking to me. Wonderful.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. You and I, it's funny, you and I have lived sort of parallel lives, but in reverse.
Yeah. Yes. It's like we sort of both teachers, both Canada, both kind of all kinds of things. And here we are on the same podcast.
I know. It is a small world after all.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Netta.
What a wonderful conversation with Jan. And I feel like buying my plane ticket right now to her bed and breakfast in the south of France, even if I'm not officially a celiac. So Jan is inviting you to go to spend a wonderful time at her beautiful bed and breakfast. Let her cook for you. Let the animals and the beautiful scenery soothe you. Stroll down to the river for an all-natural dip or soak in their pool in the heat of summer. I'll put the link to her bed and breakfast in the show notes with this episode. And if you want some free resources about what real whole foods are and where the processed food companies hide those sneaky sugars, then head on over to my website aftersugarclub.com and click on the tab What to Eat. You'll find 3 videos there, one about which foods don't have added sugars, another about how to find these foods at the grocery store, and the 3rd video is about what's the deal with fermented foods, because these are also whole foods that look after your gut health, and gut health is central to your general health. And while you're there on the website at aftersugarclub.com, you can download your simple guide to getting more energy. Just click on the tab Simple Guide, or download my 5 tips for getting rid of cravings. Whether you're an intermittent faster or not, cravings can really stop you from feeling free with your food. So download those 5 tips at aftersugarclub.com. And you can get more free resources and tips on the Life After Sugar YouTube channel, the Life After Sugar Facebook page, and come and subscribe to my Instagram account at My Life After Sugar. That's where I post pictures of what I eat, what I do, sometimes some inspiring quotes, or sometimes just pictures of our cat, so that you can see that it's totally possible to live a fun and active life even if you don't eat sugar. And for a deeper dive into your relationship with sugar and how you can work towards freeing yourself from the hold that sugar has on you so that you can get to that place of joyful freedom from sugar that I've been living for almost 7 years, and experience what it feels like not to want, need, or even miss sugar anymore, then the After Sugar Club is for you. Check it out at aftersugarclub.com. And if this podcast is inspiring you to take one more step towards your life after sugar, then could I ask you to please scroll down and leave the podcast a lovely 5-star rating and leave a short review to let me know how this podcast is inspiring you to break free from sugar your way and find the real sweetness in life. Thank you for listening. That's it for this week. Keep in touch and see you soon for another episode.